It's all about people.
We are the Seventh-day Baptist Council on History of the Seventh-day Baptist General Conference, USA and Canada. A year ago, we were the directors of the Seventh-day Baptist Historical Society. We have had fun reviewing the Historical Society's century and producing decade-by-decade bulletin inserts for use in your local church. If you haven't used all of them yet, they are all available on our website, sdbhist.org. In skimming those 100 years, we realized it's all about people. Share with us in remembering some of them.
The person most involved in that transition 100 years ago was Corliss Fitz Randolph. And that's him on the left there, good-looking guy. For many years before 1916, he had served as chairman of the Committee on Denominational History of the conference. They had planned the centennial celebration of the conference in 1902 and generated a sheaf of historical papers prepared by many SDB leaders. It was Corliss Fitz Randolph who then edited them and saw the huge 2-volume Seventh-day Baptists in Europe and America through publication in 1910. That was 99 years after the previous effort to chronicle our history. Seventh-day Baptists do things by the century and not too fast. The earlier book was Henry Clark's History of the Sabbatarians, or Seventh-day Baptists in America, published in 1811. But Seventh-day Baptists were 150 years old before Clark's book. So all that 250 years happened before the Historical Society came into being.
Corliss Randolph served 37 years as president of the Historical Society, from the beginning until his death at age 91. He never received a salary. Instead, he was a major source of the private funds and loans that supported the work through the First World War and the Depression. Historical materials that had been given to or collected by the conference had been housed in Alfred University and Milton College libraries. Mr. Randolph's passion was to gather those, plus fragile or forgotten records and manuscripts from church belfries and farmhouse attics, all into one place where they could be preserved and made accessible for researching and telling the Seventh-day Baptist history.
Lest we put Corliss Randolph on too high a pedestal, however, we must remember that SDBs will have no saints, and they even dislike naming founders, no matter how long ago they lived. Paul Green remembers Corliss Randolph as the old man who read interminably long, boring papers on the floor of General Conference. He wasn't one to make history seem exciting, so we move on.
Of course, it was a woman who brightened things up. 20 years after the 1916 beginning, Eva Lois St. John became the first paid employee of the Historical Society. She received $75 a month as a clerical assistant to Corliss Fitz Randolph, who actually then held the official title of historian, librarian, and curator of the museum, while still president of the society. Upon his death, she became librarian and curator, serving 32 years in all. Anyone who has worked in the library recognizes her tracks and helpful trails through files and cards everywhere. Many who made pilgrimages to Plainfield in those years remember how interesting she made the stories of those people in black and white portraits on the walls and all that dusty stuff in the museum cases. Others tell how she bounced up and down the long flights of stairs from the library and museum on the 3rd floor to the photocopier on the ground floor, balancing those 2-foot by 3-foot volumes of the Sabbath Recorder on her shoulder, all so she could copy some article, bounce back up the stairs, and whisk the article with a helpful typed on a typewriter letter into an envelope to send off to the Inquirer. That's probably where the sprightly comes from in the list of qualities on the slide. All those phrases historian Albert Rogers used in describing her.
The 9 historians and librarians who served the Historical Society from 1916 to 2016 shared a common trait: unswerving dedication to the preservation and communication of SDB history. They combined that dedication with their individual gifts to each contribute uniquely to the work of the Historical Society. This timeline gives a sense of the relative length of each individual's term of service. As the founder of the Society, Corliss Fitz Randolph tirelessly collected manuscripts and artifacts to preserve STB history. Ebeloa St. John matched Mr. Randolph's energy to organize, catalog, and index materials added to the collection. People who followed those two trendsetters included meticulous researchers, prolific writers, and engaging speakers. They also all filled the role of reference librarian. Together, they answered thousands upon thousands of questions from STB leaders and researchers across the country and around the world.
Reverend Albert Rogers is probably best remembered as the author of Seventh-day Baptists in Europe and America, Volume 3, which updated the history for the first half of the 20th century. Many will remember him as a teacher of the history in Alfred School of Theology, or as author of several history dramas, including Entering into Covenant, which was performed by an SCSC team at the old Newport SDB Meeting House in Newport, Rhode Island. That was during conference in 1971, when we celebrated the 300th anniversary of the founding of the Newport Church. Albert Rogers didn't hold the title of librarian, but it was during his tenure that the decision was made to catalog the library using the Library of Congress system. A contract with a professional librarian accomplished that task, for which we are forever grateful.
Tom Merchant's actual title was historian, but as the first professionally trained librarian to work for the Society, he brought invaluable skills to the library as well. Yet he's probably best remembered for creating the syllabus and teaching the Summer Institute in STB history when it was a 3-week-long course, and for his powerful dramatic readings at General Conference. His moving reading from Rosa Palmberg's China Letters was unforgettable. Like Randolph and Rogers, he also served as Society president, but not until after his time as historian.
In the 1980s, the Society first employed both a historian and a librarian, both part-time, of course. Scott Smith's parallel job as Sabbath Recorder editor limited his time for the historical work, but it was during this time that computers came into the conference offices and he introduced desktop publishing. He and librarian Thorngate also made the first effort to automate the library. Joel Osborne, on a dedicated service basis, created a custom-made program for cataloging, searching, and printing cards. It worked beautifully until the mid-90s, when the old North Star computers died and their language was no longer spoken. Remembering the past to inform the present and envision the future is not so happily applied to our experience with technology.
But the stage was set for a writer. Reverend Don Sanford was employed specifically to write a short popular history of Seventh-day Baptists. He first wrote Choosing People, not that short history. When it first went to Broadman Press for editing, they said, cut it to 1/3 the length. He did that with the help of librarian Janet Thorngate, who had become research and editorial assistant for those 5 years that their terms overlapped. Now he had all the material in order and could write Conscience Taken Captive, the short popular history. We all have our memories of Don Sanford, his way of turning any conversation with his wry humor and puns, his way of bringing history to bear on the now, the clarity and crafted focus of his sermons, his way with words. He had his ways of dramatizing it, too. We will never know how he got away with walking up that sacred stairway under the eyes of the Newport Historical Society Preservation Corps security guards.
And what can we say about Nick Kirsten? It would all be propaganda. He's not yet history. We have had 10 years of the luxury of a full-time librarian historian. Much has been accomplished toward making the library accessible to people researching in their own homes or offices. We struggle to adapt mushrooming technology to our specific values and goals, lest the Seventh-day Baptist stories be lost in the cloud. but we have a great cloud of witnesses, and it's still all about people.
Important as historians and librarians are, without the support of what we have come to call legacy partners, the work would languish. We named Julius Soxie the first such partner. The Historical Society was actually incorporated in order to receive his lifetime collection of Ephrata Seventh-day Baptist materials. For the past 35 years, most of the Soxie collection has been on long-term loan to the Pennsylvania State Archives. We are in the process of transferring ownership of that portion to them because that will allow them to do any needed professional restoration work on the manuscripts. We retain, however, those pieces most closely related to our heritage.
We know Asa Randolph as representative of early legacy partners. For the 20 years before the denominational building was finished in Plainfield, New Jersey, his law office in the Babcock Building became the corporate headquarters and storage place for the growing collections. He served 35 years as a trustee and legal advisor to the Society, and upon his death, left an endowment that continues to help support the work.
The bulk of our endowment comes from the Dr. and Mrs. Alfred S. Burdick bequests donated in the 1960s. We told their story in a Recorder article last January, but in searching it, we discovered that Ella had been making major annual contributions for some 30 years before that, including the original $75 a month for Eveloa St. John's first salary. And since publishing the article, we discovered there is a picture of the previously faceless Ella Grace Brown Burdick, a portrait hanging in the old Milton College main hall. So more on that someday.
It's all about people. No time for the many stories we could tell of the contributions made by people who have served as trustees or directors of the Society, only 33 in 100 years. Most served many years providing a focused continuity to the work, setting the goals, determining priorities, raising funds, securing staff, determining where we've been, where we are, and where we're headed. The first 5 trustees set the pattern of long service, an average of over 35 years, all serving until they died, 2 of them just before the Society's 50th anniversary. All had deep roots in SDB soil. They treasured the stories of faithful ancestors who had laid the foundation, but their vision was for the future. They saw the historical work as nurture for that future.
Just one quick romance story. We first thought there were 2 early women trustees, Ethel Titsworth and Ethel Stillman. Then we discovered that after several years as treasurer of the Society, Ethel Titsworth, on the right end of this lineup, married William Stillman, the elderly man on the left end. It was a short marriage because he died 7 years later. She apparently, however, transferred her devotion to the historical work, for she lived doing it until her death in 1960.
33 people served as trustees or directors of the Society. Trustees in New Jersey, directors after incorporation in Wisconsin. Those in yellow served as president: Corliss Randolph, Albert Rogers, Victor Skaggs, S. Kenneth Davis, Thomas Merchant, and Janet Thorngate. We could share many anecdotes, but we'll limit it to a couple stories from Victor Skaggs' era as an example of the dedication of all the trustees during this past century.
Not too long before the move from Plainfield, New Jersey to Janesville, Wisconsin, a thief broke into the Seventh-day Baptist building one night and stole our precious Samuel Hubbard 1549 New Testament and a number of other artifacts from the museum cases. The trustees posted a $1,500 reward in posters around town, $500 for the Bible and $1,000 for the other items. Of course, the police had been alerted too. Shortly thereafter, a man appeared at the door one afternoon with the Bible, saying he had obtained it from some drunk in a bar the night before. It's quite a saga. The Bible was retrieved, and then President Skaggs and COM executive Herb Saunders arranged to meet the man on the street and drive to an apartment building where the other stolen items had been stashed in a dark hallway. The exchange of artifacts for the reward money took place.
I'm going to depart from the script for a moment. I had the joy of talking with Pastor Victor Skaggs last night on the phone and told him of our celebration and what we plan to say about him. After saying, "Oh, I wish I could be there with you," he corrected some of the facts in our earlier version of this story. So we'll watch for an opportunity to expand on the retelling at a future time. When the General Conference was considering the move of all the denominational offices from New Jersey to Wisconsin in 1981, Society President Victor Skaggs, also pastor of the Plainfield Church at the time, was very vocal about his opposition to the move. The Historical Society had more to move than anyone else. However, once the conference made the decision to move, no one worked harder than Victor Skaggs to make it as smooth a transition as possible. Tom Merchant had left the post of historian. Scott Smith had not yet been employed. The board had a gargantuan task to clean the third floor and the attic they had occupied for nearly 50 years, and to decide what of the rest of the stuff in the closets and basements of the building had historical value. Here the board sits after the move to Janesville, settled in the new location and helping Scott Smith move into the work. 3 of these men later received the Society's Gold-Headed Cane Award.
To recognize special efforts made by individuals toward the preservation and communication of our history, the Historical Society started the presentation of the Gold-Headed Cane Award in 1973. Here's one of them. Each recipient receives for a period of time one of the 2 historic canes in our collection of SDB artifacts.
Some recipients researched and wrote a history of a local church or association. Some were pastors who consistently found ways to work history themes into their classes, camps, newsletters, bulletins, etc.
Some conducted periodic pilgrimages to SDB historical sites. Some led in the planning and celebration of major church anniversaries. Some taught formal classes in SDB history to pastors and other leaders.
Some gave uncounted hours of volunteer time in library and archives tasks, from cataloging and indexing to sorting and identifying pictures. They are representative of so many more. It's all about people.
What we have heard and known, what our fathers have told us, we will not hide them from their children. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power, and the wonders he has done.
It's all about the people.
It's all about people.
It's all about people.
It's all about people.
It's all about people.
It's all about
the
people. All of us.
Amen.
Remembering our past to inform the present and envision the future. The Historical Society has done that for 100 years, and the Council on History intends to do that for another 100 years. We invite you to join us. SDB history is exciting and intriguing.